Sir William, thank you so much for inviting us here to Hovingham Estate. Here I have a sense that, a great sense of history, that there is one generation handing something very special on to the next. Can you tell us a little bit about why the estate is so special to you and what you're looking forward to passing on to the next generation?
Well, you're absolutely right. I mean, my family have been here for a very, very long time, and it is immensely special. I mean, ownership of an estate like this is actually about stewardship. It's about looking after the place, doing the best you possibly can, and handing over, hopefully, something that's better to the next generation. And indeed, there's been a great tradition of forestry here. I mean, my father was a great silviculturalist. My grandfather was a keen forester. I remember actually, as a child, picnicking about where we're standing at the moment. And that got my interest in the woods. And it's about looking after them.
Looking after them, not for yourself, but for those who will follow after.
Exactly.
And as we enjoy the wonderful woodland that you have here, of course, our minds cast to the challenge across these islands. Her Majesty's government has set the ambition for 30,000 hectares of new woodland to be planted per year by the end of this Parliament. What's England's unique contribution to that UK-wide challenge, do you feel?
Well, this is obviously an enormous challenge. It's actually very exciting. I mean, never before have we had political parties at the last election rivaling each other for the amount of planting they were going to do. So that's exciting. Our challenge in England is to plant over 7,500 hectares a year by the end of this Parliament. Now, to put that into perspective, that's 3 times what we're currently achieving. It's more than we've done possibly ever. And I mean, to put into perspective, in 1971, we planted 6,500 hectares. So it is a challenge, but we have got probably the best grant schemes, certainly that we've had in my career. And I think that's quite exciting. So there's money. The government are really focused. They're very, very keen to achieve this. And I am reasonably optimistic that we can do so. It's all about partnership. This isn't something that government can do by itself. This requires everybody to engage, which I think is exciting, because we all need to work together. I mean, the commercial forestry, the industry, and that particularly in the north of England is very important. But also the people who are more environmentally minded. And actually, good forestry is about ticking all the boxes. So it's about producing productive timber, but it's also about good environmental land management. And actually, if you do it well, you can achieve all of this. In a previous role, I chaired the National Forest down in the Midlands. And the National Forest is really exciting because over the last 30 years, we've increased the tree cover in that part of lowland England from 6% to over 21%. And I set the team the challenge to bring our woods into management in the National Forest. And when I say it's the National Forest, it's not owned by the state, it's owned by private individuals, but it's supported and encouraged by the National Forest Company. And I set them the terms. They had about 40% of the woods in active management. And I set them the challenge that I wanted them to get 80% by 2020. And I thought this was a pretty unachievable challenge. We got to 81%. So it is possible. And it's so important. And alongside all this drive to get trees planted, we must make sure that they are managed going forwards. And we need people to be encouraged. So all these kids planting trees, we want them to feel they have ownership of the trees, um, so that they want to see them being managed. And local authorities and the like, they need to be keen on managing them. And this is part of the message we must get across.
What's your advice to landowners who at the moment perhaps just holding off committing land to woodland?
I'm also a farmer. I mean, I'm an arable farmer, and I rather enjoy my farming, like I enjoy my forestry. And we mustn't look at using the best land in the country for growing trees. We must grow food on the best land in the country. It's very, very important. Farming is key because we need to be fed, and so that's really important. And we're not looking at taking good farmland out of production, but there's an awful lot of less good farmland where you're not making money. And I know on my farm, and it's reasonably good, wheat growing land. There are some corners, some bits where actually would it be better to be planting trees? And the second point to make is that we have, I think, the most generous grant scheme now, the England Woodland Creation Offer, that we've ever had, certainly in my quite long career. And so economically, actually, there's quite a good message. And there's a payment, a 10-year ongoing payment of £300 a hectare. And that's pretty good. So grants are good, and the market looking forwards, I think, is good. So there's a lot of things to encourage a land manager to look at trees and say, well, actually, this can fit into my business model.
I can see on our right here this amazing beech stand.
Well, there's rather a lovely stand of beech, you're absolutely right. And this will be long-term retention. We will thin these trees, but we will keep this because it's a nice part of the woods. And part of what we're trying to do here is to make our woods attractive and beautiful. And I love going for walks in them, and it's sort of it's an attractive bit. And the woods on the left, the plantation on this side is Scots pine. It's about 50 years old, so it's fairly mature, productive. That will be felled eventually. And then the plantation just in front of us on the right is about 28 years old. It was originally planted as a mix of Sitka spruce, Douglas fir, and Corsican pine. We planted intimate mixture, so every tree is different from one next to it. Obviously, you can't now plant Corsican pine, but that is a productive wood. It is growing extremely well.
I have a sense that it's like being in a home here and going into different rooms.
You're right. You're absolutely right.
Different stands, and that's what makes it a very enjoyable walk. How do we reconcile all these different purposes when there are different groups wanting different things from trees? How do we go forward and kind of work together?
Well, one of the great things about forestry and about woods is the huge number of different benefits that they produce, whether it's landscape. We are here in an area of outstanding natural beauty. It's 17% tree cover, mostly conifer. And that's part of why this is a beautiful landscape. Environment, ecology, the birds, the bees. Looking at the whole of our woods, we try and tick all the boxes. Obviously, in certain bits, the emphasis is on one thing. In other areas, the emphasis is on another thing. But you've got carbon sequestration, and the conifer is much better for carbon sequestration because it grows much quicker. It sequestrates more, and if it's used, it produces timber at the end of the day. The carbon is locked up in that timber. Obviously, timber production. I mean, we import over 80% of our timber. I believe we have a national responsibility to produce more of our own timber because at the moment, so much of it is imported from countries that perhaps don't have quite as strong environmental standards as we have.
You mentioned the timber, the dependence on imports for our timber requirements in this country. Are we growing the right trees to meet the future demands of of society, a low carbon society, do you think?
That's a very difficult question to answer. I think on the whole we are. What we need is a mix of different types of trees. We need the native broadleaf, really, really important, part of our history, part of our heritage. But of course, we only look at native broadleaves as being the trees post the last ice age. There were far greater varieties beforehand, and we only have a relatively small number of native species. So we need them, but we also need productive conifers to produce the timber our mills require, our industry requires. Keeps people employed, it sequestrates carbon, it locks up carbon in the products, and certainly in the north of England, forestry is an important industry, and even more so when you get into Scotland. We need a complete mix, and also, I was talking earlier about risk management. We need to plant a variety of different species so that when climate change comes and things change, we can cope with it, we can manage it. We mustn't forget the woodland management as part of the whole deal, because and I remember, again, going back to the National Forest, when they first started planting the National Forest, I was deeply worried that all these fields that were being planted up were then going to just become biomass. And of course, the one thing I haven't talked about is the grey squirrel, because the challenge of hardwood timber requires, in producing a timber product at the end of the day, requires the management of the grey squirrel, and that's because if we don't, we won't get decent trees. It's easier to grow conifers, it's easier to grow softwood than it is to grow hardwood, but you need both, and that's really, really important. And it's about creating forests that are biodiverse, that do produce timber, produce good quality timber, because that's what makes the woods profitable. If your woods are profitable, then you can afford to do all the other things which are good for society, good for the environment, good for our ecology, etc. So yes, I'm very optimistic about where we're going.
Well, William, thank you so much for having us here at Hovingham this afternoon. It's been a wonderful insight into the work you're doing here, and obviously thinking about the whole country as well, and the woodland challenge that everybody is feeling.
Well, it's been an absolute delight. I mean, Hovingham it's about family. This is a multi-generational exercise that we've been doing. I'm really lucky. My father was a great silviculturalist. I really learnt a huge amount of it from him, and it's about generations working together.
Thank you very much.